It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our third and final panel of the day. Our moderator for this panel on pricing is an expert in pricing, it's Professor Meng Chang. He's a professor in the electrical engineering department here, has done a lot of very interesting work, and I invited him to moderate this panel because of his work on large body work on smart data pricing. He's looked at how pricing can help do things like demand side management and affect demand for mobile. So he knows a lot about smart data pricing, even has had conferences at Princeton on multi-day long conferences on that topic alone. So today we just have 75 minutes, but we're very fortunate to have Meng moderate our last panel on pricing.
Well, thank you, Nick. Good afternoon. My name is Meng Chang, again, from Electrical Engineering Department. I happen to work on smart data pricing quite a bit over the last few years, and it's a great pleasure to be drafted by Nick to help moderate this outstanding panel. We've got 5 excellent and diverse background speakers in the panel. As Mick mentioned, this is the last panel. I guess we are standing between lunch and afternoon tea for the audience, so 75 minutes at most. This is a large topic. One can think of ways to divide it, for example, whom to charge, okay, or how to charge it, or for what to charge it. I think our instruction is to focus this panel primarily on the first track, which is related to two-sided pricing, or depending on the continent and the country, some people call it toll-free, open toll-free, closed toll-free, zero rating, sponsored content, 1-800 number for mobile data, and so on and so forth. Split billing, that's latest term for similar concept in enterprise market. Well, what we want to do is to give each of the 5 panelists at most 10 minutes to give a presentation with or without slides. And then we hope to generate a lot of disagreement among the panelists and try to be politely provocative and have a debate. And if they don't debate, I'll try to make up something for them to debate about. But I suspect they will have different opinions on a few subject matter related to zero rating and toll-free pricing. And then we'll try to save 10 minutes from the audience for Q&A. Now, the 5 panelists we have are in this order of seating here: Benjamin Bartlett from Facebook, Dhanaraj Thakur from Alliance for an Affordable Internet, Andrew Olisko from University of Minnesota, Bill Lair from MIT, and Yanis Yakumis from Stanford. Let's start with Benjamin. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for the invitation to be part of this. These are important issues to talk through, and it's great to be part of a discussion like this. Let me see if I can get our slides up. Good. So on a panel talking about zero rating and related issues, I thought it'd be useful to start off with an overview, kind of an example of how we're using these issues, how they tie into our connectivity initiatives, and the impact that they have in expanding connectivity around the world, and really the real world impacts that the issues can have. So just to kind of take a step back and for a little bit of context of how these issues fit in with the connectivity efforts that we're working on. Just wanted to talk briefly about the value that we see and the impact that these issues do have on people. So when you talk about connectivity, it's really having an impact on economic development, health, education, all these ways that are impacting people on the ground. But as we look at why people aren't connected, nearly 60% of the world still isn't online. When we look at those, there are big issues, big barriers to why people aren't coming online. It might be in an area where there's not adequate infrastructure. There might be affordability. People just can't afford to do it. But a lot of people, a big portion of people who aren't online yet, aren't coming online because they don't see the value in it. They don't see the value in connectivity. They don't see the relevance of the content that's online. So they might live in areas where there is already adequate internet infrastructure. And they might be able to afford to pay for some data, but they're not coming online because they haven't experienced it. They don't know why they want to be online. So in response to that, Internet.org is our program that's looking at these issues overall. Part of it, we look at, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to solving these issues. So, one part of the program is looking at different barriers. So one part of it's in areas where there is inadequate infrastructure. We look at how technology can be used to solve that barrier. Part of it's the zero rating part, so where that ties in. And that's really our free basics program. So I just want to give a brief overview of how it works, how it's structured, and kind of how it's different from other types of zero rating, because zero rating can be structured in a lot of different ways. And there are distinctions between what we're doing and maybe a program that other people have. So what free basics is, and some of you might already be familiar with it, but just the recap of how it works. So it's a program where we partner with mobile operators in different, mainly developing countries around the world right now. We partner with the mobile operator to offer free access to basic services. So if you think about education, health, different job sites, things like that, it would really be locally relevant and show people the value of why they want to be connected. As you look at how it's structured, there are a few important parts of how this program works that might be different from sponsored data or other zero rating programs. So first, it's non-exclusive, so any operator can participate. We don't have any exclusive deals with certain mobile carriers. It's open and non-discriminatory, so it's an open platform. Any service developer, any site developer can participate. All they have to do is meet the subjective technical guidelines that are the same for everyone. It's the same that applies to Facebook, our version of Facebook that's on the platform. It's the same for any developer who wants to participate. They're publicly published. And they're mainly geared toward making sure that it's data efficient. So you can't have huge photo files or streaming video, streaming music, things like that. So it's open platform, and then it's free. So the users don't have to pay for it. The content providers don't have to pay for it. They don't have to pay the operator or Facebook. Facebook isn't paying the operator, so it's not sponsored data. We're not paying for the operator to provide this. Operator is doing it because overall it grows the number of people who are coming online. And finally, it's transparent. So we make the participation guidelines available online. Everything is fully available to the developers who want to participate and the users. So users understand what it is that they're using, that it's not the full internet, that it's an open platform where they're being given free access to the certain services that developers put on there. So it's designed again, so when you think about the types of services that people would want to see and the types of services that would show the value of connectivity in the first place, we think about basic services that are locally relevant. So not just global services, but services that within that market, within that region, in that country, are really showing people useful information. How does it impact their lives? So just examples of the types of services that are there. Information services, people get news, weather. There's a focus on education, health, especially women's health. This is an area where we've seen a lot of usage. Pregnancy information. There are also communications tools, which Facebook is on there. So basically, because you can't have large photo files and video streaming, basically it's versions that are mostly text-based. So it's stripped down versions to be data efficient that can be on the platform. And so the idea when we bring people online this way, the idea is not for people to come online and just use the free part and stay there. It's really to provide an on-ramp to the broader internet. So it's getting people who haven't been online first or at all to come online, see the relevance, why they want to do this, and then for the people who can't afford to pay for some data, to go on and access the broader internet. So you can see the stages here of how the program's designed and the progression that we are trying to see. And so far, the impact that we've seen is it works in this way. In markets where it's launched around the world, people are coming online at least 50% faster than they were before the launch. And of the people who do come online with this platform, at least half of the people within a month go on to pay for some data to start accessing the broader internet. So it's showing that people it's effective in not just having a set of free services where people come on and stay there through the zero rating, but really it's a tool that brings people online and then moves them on to the open internet. And here's just an overview of where we are so far. So this is worldwide when we're looking at the impact that we're having. We're in 37 countries and counting, and you can see again that it's mostly targeted toward the developing world first as we're experimenting with the program and seeing where we can have the most impact. So that's a quick overview of how this issue ties into our connectivity initiatives and how we're working on expanding connectivity using the zero rating program like this. And hopefully that's a good example to kickstart the discussion with the other panelists. Thanks.
Thank you, Benjamin. And the next we have Danaraj Thakur. Thank you.
Thank you, Mung. Hi, everyone. So the reality, as Ben hinted at, is that there are roughly about almost 4 billion people who are offline today, who are not connected to the internet, and who therefore cannot enjoy the benefits, the various benefits of connectivity. There are many challenges to that, to getting them online, one of which is affordability. So in that context, about 3 years ago, the Alliance for Affordable Internet was created. This is a broad alliance which includes private sector technology companies such as Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and others, development partners, USAID, the Swedish International Development Agency, and government partners, government of Nigeria, government of Ghana, and so on, and various civil society groups. There's about 80 different organizations involved who all focus on the issue of affordability and making sure that broadband prices are cheaper in developing countries. That's our focus. And we do that at different levels. At international level, we focus on policy reform, and at the national level through multi-stakeholder coalitions in various countries in the global south. So given that situation then, and observing the different types of mobile data services that are now available in many developing country markets, our focus is the relevance or the implications of these types of data services on affordability. And this includes zero rating as well. The problem that we observed in trying to understand this question is that there is a lack of empirical data in the discourse around zero rating. And this was the reason why we started a research project around this very question late last year. And that's what I want to talk about with you now very briefly. The project focuses primarily on the user side, right? So we're trying to understand what kinds of actual services are available to the user, what plans are being offered by the various mobile phone operators in developing countries. And we focus on 8 developing countries specifically, 2 in South America, Colombia and Peru, 3 in Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya, and 3 in Asia, India, Philippines, and Bangladesh. So what we did initially was to map all the kinds of plans that were offered by the mobile operators in these countries. The emphasis here is on mobile and on prepaid data, since that is what vast majority of people use in these countries. And in doing that, in doing a kind of review of all these plans, we came up with a brief typology of different types of plans that are available. We came up with 4 broad categories. One is what we call full cost, where essentially the consumer pays for data at whatever the relevant data cap is, and they can use that data in any way they wish. The second type is what we call service specific, and this is where the user purchases some data, often at a cheaper price than the full cost, but is restricted in where and what kinds of websites and what kinds of apps they can use that data for. The third type is quite rare and what I think is kind of innovative, and what we call earned data. And here, the user essentially receives data in exchange for some kind of action with the operator. For example, they might view some ads, they might fill out a survey or so on, and they get data in return that they can use for in whichever way they want. And in the final category, which we know about, is called zero-rated data, where the user receives some data at no cost. It doesn't affect their data cap, but typically they are restricted to a certain set of sites or apps and what they can do with the data. So when we reviewed the plans under these broad categories, we found that roughly half of all plans across all 8 countries fit under this service-specific model. In other words, these social media bundles, for example, where you get data that you can only use for WhatsApp or Facebook and so on. The full cost plans accounted for about 1/3 of all plans, and then zero-rated plans accounted for about 13%. The next part of our research was to focus on the user, as I said, and what we implemented was a series of surveys in all 8 countries. These are mobile phone-based surveys that draw on representative samples of mobile internet users in each of these countries. The intent here is to understand what are some of the preferences of these users, what kinds of plans were they using, and which operators were they using. So what I wanted to do then is just give you a few interesting findings that we have so far. This is a work in progress, and the plan is to release a more complete, comprehensive report next month, as well as an entire data set, which we hope other people can use and maybe take it a little further than us. The first point is around what kinds of plans are people actually using. And so here, based by mapping all the plans that are available to the operator, we're allowed the users to actually select the plans that they're currently using, right? And what we found was that across most countries on average, it was about 50% of users who use what we call these full cost plans, where they're paying for data without any restriction. Only about 20% were using the service-specific plans or the data bundles that I mentioned earlier. And roughly less than 4% were using zero-rated plans. We also asked the users, and again, this is across all 8 countries, there are some variance when you look at different countries. We also asked the users, what are the reasons for using zero-rating? I mentioned that specifically since that is of interest for this panel in particular. So when we ask people that, one of the primary reasons obviously is because a paid data plan is too expensive for them, and this was one of the reasons I put forward. A secondary reason was simply that they wanted to use Facebook or WhatsApp or Twitter or whatever zero-rated application was available. And a third reason was that they simply wanted to try it out and experiment with the zero-rating model. Another issue then is with the benefits that would accrue to the user in this when using zero-rating services. So here, the most common frequent response in terms of benefits from using a zero-rated service was access to content about their community. The third highest response was supporting education, and the second and third were supporting education and then access to government services. Now, what's interesting here is that we have to recognize there are different kinds of zero-rating services and apps available. And when we dug a little deeper into the data, it suggests that people that use free basics ranked access to content about community as one of their highest benefits. This is different from people that use Wikipedia Zero that ranked supporting education and getting jobs or access to employment as the highest benefit. And finally, people that use zero-rated WhatsApp services said that one of the biggest benefits was supporting a political party or political activism in general. So one final point I'll mention then is a hypothetical that we raised to them in terms of zero-rating, because we're also interested in alternative ways in which data could be offered in a zero-rated format. So raise the issue. Suppose you were given free data from your mobile operator, but on a condition. Which condition would be most acceptable to you? And the first condition was being provided unlimited data, but that was only valid for a limited time. So you get, for example, unlimited data, but only for 1 day. The second condition was having unlimited data, but only being limited to a certain number of data sites or apps, right? And then finally, having a data cap that you could use on any site or app. So for example, 500 megs that you could use on any website or app. So the most popular choice was having data that was for a limited amount of time. But what's interesting again is that there is some variance across countries, and while typically across all countries, roughly 50% or more thought that this was the best condition under which to get a free data option. In 2 countries, Colombia and Peru, there were a significant minority who thought otherwise. So there are some interesting results here in terms of the way people use the zero-rated services, the benefits that accrue to them, and the preferences that they have and what might be more effective for them. As I mentioned, it's a work in progress, and so our plan is to publish something much more comprehensive in a month or so, as well as share the data publicly. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhanaraj. And our next panelist is Andrew Alisco from University of Minnesota. Andrew, thank you.
Let's see if we can get this to work. Works. Yes, so this presentation will be directed more at the topics that were the focus of the first 2 panels, namely interconnection of large networks, much less connecting the kind of edge users in less developed countries, as the previous 2 presentations on this panel were discussing. So I wanted to bring up a couple of points which I think are not emphasized enough or not appreciated enough. And one of the key ones of them is that the interconnection of big networks in the large scheme of things is totally inconsequential, okay? Because it's so inexpensive. Okay? And this actually leads to the main theme of the presentation, namely, what does it really mean for, well, telecom and also for the evolution of the economy? Okay? Namely, it serves as a very nice potential choke points, a way to kind of bring in new non-market aspects to kind of that business and potentially get into some rent extraction areas. So why is it not important? Well, you look at the economics of telecom. Worldwide, revenues from telecom service are around $2 trillion per year, about 2.5% of the world GDP. How much does it cost to provide interconnection? Well, what do you mean by interconnection? Well, if you actually look at something bigger than just interconnection, you look at how much will it cost to provide all the backbone services for all of the internet services around the world, and you do it by looking, say, at revenues of large backbone providers like Cogent or Level 3 and so on, and extrapolate to all of the world's internet traffic, you're talking about maybe 10, maybe at most $20 billion per year. So 1%, more likely perhaps 0.5% of total world telecom services would provide adequate backbone services for everybody. Okay? So in the large scheme of things, that's totally inconsequential. It's a noise. If you're having central planning in place, you wouldn't worry about it. Okay? But in practice, you do. Okay? Becomes actually quite a controversial topic in many cases, and we even have workshops on this topic, as witnessed to today's event. And my claim is that actually it is worth studying just for that reason, because people do end up paying attention, because it is being used for certain purposes, and these purposes are actually kind of symptomatic of what's happening in various other parts of the economy. Okay? So when people ask me what my projection about the future of the world economy, my one-word answer is Turing. And you might ask, well, what do you mean Turing? Alan Turing, I mean, of course, it's very nice to mention Alan Turing here in Princeton because his key elements of his career were right here in Princeton. He got his PhD from Princeton University, did his early work on computational complexity, which set the stage for modern industry here in Princeton. So he's a very important figure, seminal figure in the development of our industries. But what does Alan Turing have to do with the economy? No, I do not mean Alan Turing. The Turing I have in mind is Turing Pharmaceuticals, okay? And Martin Shkreli, I guess now at this point, former CEO of Turing Pharmaceutical, this kind of smirking juvenile guy who managed to raise the price of a generic drug from $13.50 to $750, okay? So why do I say this is the kind of example or symptomatic of the development of the economy? Well, because it's symptomatic of what I think is becoming focus of activities, namely searching for choke points. Somehow this chap kind of figured out there was a way to make a humongous amount of money out of a generic drug that's not protected by any patents. But, well, it's a small market. It takes quite a long time for a competing drug to get through approval process. And so he figured, and if it weren't for the public uproar, probably correctly, that you could make gazillions of dollars out of it. And in fact, except for his smirking attitude and other kinds of things, and the 50-fold rise in price, this is really what the pharmaceutical industry as a whole has been doing. You look at the economics of pharmaceuticals, you observe the last few years remarkable degree to which they've been raising prices even of generics, very often doing in lockstep too, protected. And moreover, these large pharmaceutical companies which claim that their big profits are needed to kind of motivate them to do research on all these innovative new drugs, they've been retreating from drug discovery. Okay? They're now relying on purchasing the new drugs from new startups. So how can they expect to maintain their big profit margins? Obviously, what must be happening is that the source of the profits is not novelty, coming up with innovative new drugs. It must be something else. The marketing muscle, the lobbying and regulatory kind of law specialties, distribution, various types, and you actually look where the resources are going. That's what's happening. And my claim, this is really what's going to be happening in more and more different areas of the economy. And much of it will involve obfuscation or trying to bamboozle the people and confuseology. So I'm saying that I think more and more, and again, you have lots of other, I mean, I can give you lots of kind of objective evidence of it. In the developed countries, what we observe is over the last decade or two, there's been a decline in the capital intensity. Companies are investing less and less. Okay? But they're looking for very high profits, and somehow they are actually managing to maintain very high profits too, which is one of the amazing things. So I think where the economy seems to be going at the moment, and one of the interesting questions is to what extent will there be some kind of a reaction to it, is you look for choke points that you can exploit for rent extraction, minimize your real investments other than in your lobbyists and lawyers and such like, and also use a lot of what I call confuseology, borrowing a term from Scott Dilbert, Scott Adams Dilbert, namely just confuse people. Yes, this is a world of lots of information, but it's also obviously a world of lots of misinformation, and we see lots of crowd groupthink going on. We have all those birthers, truthers, anti-vaxxers, and of course lots of politicians and millions of people supporting various types of politicians that you sometimes scratch your head and wonder how can that be. Well, this seems to be actually quite common, increasingly common actually in many ways. Okay. So another instructive example from the world of telecom. Again, I think telecom is interesting because this was an industry that has been important for the world for centuries, even thousands of years, and often was subject to special regulation many ways. And many of the tendencies that we observe in the rest of the economy now were actually kind of key to telecom economics. And so I think it goes both ways. You really should look at the picture in a kind of larger picture where telecom is just one piece of the total kind of puzzle. So here's an example. This is a story kind of citing a Verizon spokesperson talking about some complaints from customers about high international data roaming rates, up to about $20 per megabyte. And she said it's a complex system. There's lots of different layers that determine rates, like regulatory and tax issues in different countries. Our goal, as always, is to provide the best value. Okay. Well, if you kind of search into it, you discover some interesting figures. In particular, there is a filing with T-Mobile, with FCC. Presumably kind of has been vetted somewhat, kind of there is some credibility can be placed on it. Their estimate is domestically cost of delivering data on the wireless network is about 1/5 of a penny per megabyte, as opposed to the 20 megabytes for international roaming. And T-Mobile is selling wholesale roaming, data roaming to its international kind of partners or other customers at rates which, well, range median is about 9 cents per megabyte, average 20 cents, 95th percentile is about 40 cents. But the retail rates for some carriers are about $20 per megabyte. Huge gap between actual costs and the prices. And lots of confusion, lots of obfuscation, all the stories about our goal is to deliver the best possible value. Okay. So I think we're going to see much more of that. And you see it again, obviously some people understand it very well. Here's a quote from a Wall Street analyst discussing it. Yes, nowadays incremental cost of providing that extra minute of calling, extra byte of data close to zero. So carriers generally try to price based on what they think they can get away with, constrained by competition, customer inertia, either voluntary or enforced by contracts, regulation or threats thereof, and their execution capabilities. And then you see it in other parts of the economy too, especially pharmaceutical, obviously famously or infamously in that case, but also others. And in some sense, there are positive ways of looking at it. You know, lots of people are worrying about what will robots do to employment. What will all those people do if their jobs are replaced by robots? Well, they'll be fooling each other and trying to detect fooling by others, which is actually something which is very natural for human beings. So I want to mention very briefly. So I think these developments, as I mentioned, have some positive angles to them. On the other hand, they do threaten the foundations of the market economy, of market capitalism. But they are coming. Much of that tendency is unavoidable. Again, marginal costs are declining. Again, we see these trends kind of over long periods of time. For technologists, something to bear in mind is that the interest in politics and law that people have been exhibiting to a greater extent recently is a very sound move, because indeed engineering efficiency is likely to be kind of at best secondary, very often just tertiary consideration. And very often, in fact, the technical expertise will be needed just to kind of obfuscate the issues. Okay, various methods. Something else, again, we're talking about this future of the economy. The market economy is, unlike, say, what economists typically think, or many people think, not something very natural to our species. In fact, it has been kind of the dominant mode of allocating resources only over the last couple of centuries, which also happen to be like the only 2 centuries of sustained very rapid economic progress. If you look at human history over thousands of years, I think hardly anybody would question that the market economy was really instrumental to it. And actually, if you read Karl Marx, not the parts where he kind of this is capitalism, but he talks about the innovation that capitalism brought to the world. I mean, he sounds like a really wide-eyed free market fanatic, so on. Okay, so this really caused a big change in the trends and evolution of human society, but it's not something natural to our species. Historically, and we see it also even say in reaction on the political scene these days, people are much more concerned about social relations, stability of the social relations and related things. And in fact, both firms and individuals resent the cold discipline of the market. Okay. You see it again in political scene today, on the business scene. Of course, we've seen all these trends on consolidation in many cases. What's driving it? Very often, well, nobody wants to be a price taker. Okay? They'll rather be price makers in that case. And the advantage of having the market and forcing people or organizations to be price takers, it forces them to concentrate on quality and price, not on all the other strategic concerns, which are quite a bit more natural to people. But again, naturally, historically, going back thousands of years, people tended to fall into the kind of trend of behavior exemplified by Game of Thrones. Okay? And market kind of pushes people away from that. And that may be going away from it. Because modern technology, as combined with human psychology, it makes it possible to kind of eliminate the market from consideration. Okay? So it will be a very interesting kind of period. As I mentioned, I think we will see an increasing concentration, not just looking for choke points, in incidents such as issues of interconnection, providing bad service, players blaming each other. We certainly see it in the cable TV industry, blackouts, and then the PR game going on. Who's responsible? Is it the content provider or the cable TV network? Who's going to yield? And of course, in the end, this is really about division of spoils. They are going to be extracting as much as they can out of the public and so on. And what will undoubtedly be enabled by all the new technology is do a much more efficient job of extracting that money from consumers and so on. And also what's hard, so regulation and public relations and legislation are likely to play an increasing role. And how well you play it will be very important. The technology will play a slight role in it. And one of the difficulties is it will be very hard to do any kind of ex-ante legislation or regulation, because very often where the choke point is very hard to predict. And you see it, for example, with Apple. Why is Apple the world's most valuable company? Largely because of the iPhone. And why is the iPhone such a money maker? Because of the App Store. And now the App Store did not really become a significant factor until it was opened up. Steve Jobs did not think of the App Store as something other people would be contributing to. It would be just products produced by internal kind of employees of Apple. So, I mean, we see lots of these examples, lots of very dynamic kind of developments, and it'll be a game of trying to find out how one can get hold of interesting choke points that will lead to rent extraction. And can we somehow prevent it from becoming kind of an empty game, essentially chasing musical chairs and so on, and make sure there is some real value being created? That would be the kind of big question for us. Okay. And so I have some papers, and I'll have some more papers specifically on this topic very soon. So thank you. Okay, let's see, we need to go to panel. You are, yes, okay, let's see, okay, now, and we see, let's see which one's going to be here.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, and next speaker is Bill Nair from MIT.
So first, let me just say it's a real pleasure to be here, and my thanks to Nick for organizing what I think has been a really great workshop, and to Professor Chang for moderating this panel. And I appreciate all the folks, spending the whole, spending the day here and still being here. I'm going to be offering one regulatory economist perspective. So I actually have a PhD in economics, but I think everybody here has been talking about a lot of really interesting economics, and I think the economics profession would benefit from understanding more about some of the work that's coming from people that are not formally trained economists. My colleagues at MIT, David Clark and Steve Bauer, and a number of the other folks that I work with, I know all wish they could have been here today. And were they here today, I think they would have had some really interesting things to possibly contribute to some of the earlier discussions. But sir, I'm the economist who only kind of understands the technology. And so, I took serious these questions. What are the different ways of pricing internet congestion? What are the effects of data caps, pay-as-you-go pricing? How does zero rating affect? And those, what's in blue was sort of like, those are the things I want to focus on. I was sort of saying, well, what are these questions really about? So first is this question about pricing internet congestion. So I'm first saying, like, are we talking about congestion pricing, or are we talking about usage-based? And are we talking about retail pricing or wholesale? And mostly what I'm going to be talking about is really the importance of usage-based pricing. I think that goes to the heart, in some sense, of what Andrew was saying. I don't disagree with what Andrew's saying, but when he puts up something like the T-Mobile thing, he's true about the incremental cost, but most of the pricing is not about the incremental cost, the point I'll get to. And then the question about who pays for broadband, which I think is a retail question in the zero rating context we're talking about. And obviously how you would answer these questions is going to be different depending on the state of competition. And the subtext, which we really haven't been talking about here, is we may be unhappy with the way the world's going, but if you think about what a regulator would do, you'd have to ask yourself, what could the regulator do? So like, for example, the FCC can't regulate the pricing of broadband today directly, politically, even if they wanted to. Whether or not they actually have the authority to do, that's a debate. And those are all fun kinds of discussions. And then the last thing I want to touch on, which is some work I'm involved in now, is the rise of traffic-sensitive costs. It's the issue. What's driving a lot of this is it really a question of video traffic? We know in like mobile it may be a question of scarce spectrum resources. That's a separate question. But is it about video? And if it is, are we happy with that? So first on this point of congestion or usage-based pricing, let's just make the point that all pricing is usage-based in the sense that all pricing is taking account of demand, its sensitivity, and it's all dynamic. The question is on what time scale is it dynamically? Almost all pricing tariffs have multiple elements. Non-recurring component, you sign up to join a club, you get an installation, they may waive it, you have to buy certain equipment that you pay once, that's a non-recurring cost. Then you pay certain fixed costs, and you may pay different costs based on what features, like do you get some kind of special phone service or vanity thing, and those may be monthly fixed. And then you pay usage, dollars per megabyte, and you may pay that in multiple tiers. And this could be arbitrarily complex, and I've given enough points, I could fit any kind of demand and segment anything, so I could do the kind of things that Andrew's talking about, which is with this information at the retail level, I can do, essentially first-degree price discrimination. And that's sort of what we should be thinking about. And in terms of it being dynamic, the thing I'm not going to talk so much about is the value of real-time pricing, which is a special case of this. But what a lot of the functionality and the very interesting work that Professor Chang and other folks are doing in smart data pricing is basically saying we have the capability increasingly on a much more granular basis in time, in location, in context, what's the flavor of your application, what's the color of your hair, to basically do different kinds of pricing. Whether we should or not in certain situations is a different issue. Prices serve two broad functions. First and foremost, you can't have an economically viable business unless the total revenue that's coming in is sufficient to pay for the cost in some sort of dynamic going forward sense. Total cost, total incremental long run costs. Sunk costs that don't have to ever be recovered again, it's a different story. But there are very few things that are really, really like that. And that's really the most important thing, and that most of the costs are fixed in this business and increasingly shared, especially when you go into mobile. So they're shared resources. As soon as you got a shared cost, what it means is that it's not incremental to a specific individual subscriber. And so how you recover it, economics doesn't give you real good guidance. It's somewhat arbitrary, and you end up in this tussle that Christopher Yu was talking about like how do you share the gains from trade. Everybody would like to say, oh, you paid for the cow because you wanted leather, so why should I pay for the cow because I want meat? Because the meat's free. It didn't cost you anything. There's no incremental cost to give me the meat given that you've produced the leather. So that's a game. That's a hard problem. The second really important thing that pricing can do is it can be a signal. It can induce efficient behavior. And so when economists more narrowly focused on the question of congestion pricing, it was a question about sort of recovering the incremental capital costs and internalizing the externality that a user who uses peak capacity imposes on other users. And ideally, if it has the right effect, it levels out demand so the whole system's cheaper and you shift demand to different times, or you ration it if it's really scarce. But in this business, if we've got scarce stuff, it's because we're not doing things right. That doesn't really serve anybody's interests. And then the questions we're talking about wholesale or resale or wholesale pricing. Retail, which is most of what I'll talk about in the next couple slides, is talking about what are we doing about consumer demand behavior. The wholesale, which when I think of interconnection, I think of that more as an interconnection problem, is what is the implications for supply behavior? And when we think about retail rate regulation versus wholesale interconnection regulation, which, by the way, any kind of interconnection regulation, like classifying Title II, is price regulation. It's not explicitly, but it's implicitly. Because if it weren't, I could sit there and say, oh, I have to interconnect with someone? I will. I'm totally happy to do that. The price is infinite. And they say, well, no, it can't be infinite. You're not interconnecting. Say, aha. So there is a price regulation. The question is, what is it implicitly and how specific do you want to get? And you can't do both of those because otherwise you have an over-constrained problem. We saw what happened in the electric markets in California. We tried to over-constrain it. So here's some fast sort of comments on some of these issues. So usage pricing. I think the future is some version of tiered pricing, where basically what you figure out is it's close to a fixed price for people in the tier where you're covering the costs. Any kind of usage-based pricing, pay-as-you-go or data caps or zero rating, are basically particular ways to do usage-based pricing, and obviously they are tools for doing price discrimination. But as an economist, price discrimination is actually, it's very, very common. In fact, I believe you can't get away from it. You never have completely uniform prices, because if I have flat rate prices to everybody across the United States, that means I'm price discriminating in favor of people out in the red states in the middle of the country where it's expensive to provide service, and discriminating against people on the East Coast where it's actually cheaper. So, there's always going to be some level of price discrimination. When you think about what consumers want, well, obviously they want lower prices, more choice, better quality. Everybody wants that, of course. And it does matter. How we answer these questions, ultimately those are the questions we're trying to answer. But there's also lots of evidence to say consumers want flat rates. Why? Because they're simple, they're easy to understand, they don't have hidden, unexpected charges. We may be able to do that in other kinds of ways. People also, and as an industry, we would like them to have a marginal cost for usage when they're using it of zero. So my cell plan, if I'm in the right tier, it should be that I never have to worry about making a phone call. The marginal cost of making that phone call is zero. And if I'm bumping up against my cap or paying overage charges, and those overage charges, like those stupid baggage fees the airlines charge me all the time, if those become a significant piece of revenue, then we should worry about it, because then we should smell a rat in the system. But otherwise, really heavy users that are imposing a lot of costs on the system that we think ought to pay, they ought to pay possibly one price. People that aren't imposing such a cost or doing something different, they might pay a different cost, and they would be in different tiers, and they might be flavored in different kinds of ways. And that's a model people can understand, makes a lot of sense. The regulatory concerns, saying, yeah, we should of course be able to do that, are the same ones we've always had, fairness and access. So, are consumers paying too much? So what are really the costs? So really getting behind the numbers that Andrew put up there and say, whoa, 0.02002 is the incremental cost of data, and then they're charging 0.009, that seems like a big disparity. Are they is someone getting rich here? Or is that 0.009 contributing to the shared and fixed costs that a mobile operator has? That's a question. If you ask them, they have very different answers. They've got charts and spreadsheets, and I would really like to have an answer to that, but it's a hard question to answer. On the supply side, we're worried about investment, efficiency, and all that stuff. With respect to zero rating, like someone asked me, is that a good idea? Well, generally, yes. It's a question of fundamentally about who pays for the broadband, and the internet is at least a two-sided market. I actually think it's n-sided, and the two-sided model needs to be really thought about much more. It needs to be understood as a fiction, because it gets us into trouble and makes us, draw some I think goofy references at times, inferences at times. So what's the purpose? Well, it lowers retail prices for broadband access. Is that a good thing? Yeah, absolutely. In the developing world, absolutely. And does it create problems? Should we be concerned about that? Probably. We certainly should be concerned about in the developed world. But I think the notion that that there certainly is a risk that it could be abused for foreclosure if there's monopoly price, and that's I care a lot more about than monopoly pricing or prices being too high. I don't really care how expensive Netflix is, because you probably, if you couldn't afford it, you'd probably be doing something more productive than watching TV. So, you know, but I do potentially care about if I'm trying to download my grandmother's x-ray because I need that to get it to the doctor. That's a different question, which will take me to my last point. So the last point, and this is a paper I'm trying to work on with Doug Seeker, is maybe this problem's all really about the fact that we're trying to build a network because of television and video. And is that really what we want to do? And so I think when you ask the question, you can ask the question at sort of two levels. One is, you know, how far do we want convergence to proceed? And as someone that spends a lot of time dealing in the actual regulatory process, and I spend time talking to people that are dealing with sort of the convergence of broadcast regulation, and I deal with people trying to deal with cases of communications regulation, I recognize those people in those rooms often are not the same people. The companies often are. But it's like, how can you have a good conversation across those? And then I see all kinds of problems arising. So like must-carry disputes that spill over into net neutrality and vice versa. And so that's an issue. And I think if you look at this at the technical level, if you look at this at the business model level, and if you look at it certainly at the regulatory level, you might ask yourself, you know, these separate silos we've had certainly right now are doing a lot of good things for us, and we would be pretty messed up if they were really gotten rid of too fast. And we may want to ask ourselves how far we really want to go down that path. A second thing that bothers me is a lot of this is being driven by entertainment economics. In the slide that Walter Johnston put up, that was, I think, the fourth bullet point of one of the things we need to do. And it's definitely a really important thing. It's a really important use of all of these networks, and it's certainly what's driving a lot of behavior. But you know, I'm just concerned, not that it isn't a really important sector, but that the economics of it are completely different. So like what drives the concerns of Hollywood and the entertainment business, you know, how you think about forecasting demand, competition for leisure, time, attention, all that sort of stuff is completely different than what should fundamentally drive things like smart healthcare, smart green energy, all these other things that supposedly is where the big economic growth is going to come from. You know, people switching from games to movies, to more interactive movies, that does not going to create, that's important part of the economy, but that's not going to drive major economic growth and transformations in our society. And so I think what we're trying to do is sort of ask ourselves, well, imagine if all that entertainment video were not on the internet. Would we be building a different internet? Would we be thinking about some of these policy questions differently? And so let me stop there.
Thank you, Bill. Last but not least, Giannis, Stan.
So, Andrew, where is the?
Let's go. Oh, no, not
Hello, thank you very much for being here. This is joint work with Sachin Kati and Nick McKeown from Stanford University. And I will be talking about how to make zero rating better for users. So there is clearly a lot of excitement about zero rating, and you can tell this from the talks that we already hear, but also by just looking all the zero rating programs that became available over the last few years. We have Wikipedia Zero and Free Basics from Facebook. We have Music Freedom and BingeOn from T-Mobile here in the US. Netflix had a partnership with Australian ISPs, so quite a lot of excitement. But at the same time, there are many concerns on whether these type of programs are good for users. Netflix had to publicly apologize and withdraw from their service in Australia after many of their users complained that they violated net neutrality. Free Basics got banned in India by regulators, and the FCC here in the US says that it will keep an eye on zero rating programs by T-Mobile. And this is not a new debate. Essentially, there are two sides. One side says that the network should be neutral and all traffic should be treated the same, and the other side says that ISPs should be able to partner with content providers in order to have this type of differentiated services, either for QoS or for pricing. Now, there is a very interesting paradox in this picture. So everyone is talking on behalf of users and users benefit. But interestingly, as users, we are nowhere in this picture, right? So why don't we ask users how they want their own traffic to be treated? So to get a sense of how zero-rated would look like if we were to enable users to decide for themselves, we did an online survey in the US, and we asked 1,000 smartphone owners about what they feel for zero rating. So 63% of them said that they would be interested to use a zero rating program. And then we start becoming a bit more specific. We told them, if you could choose which music applications would be included on a program like Music Freedom, which ones would that be? And you can see a summary of the responses that we got in this graph. I call it a user preference graph. So on the x-axis, you see the different applications that users listed. And on the y-axis, you see the number of users that asked for each of these applications. So I think the most interesting part on this graph is that there is a long tail of user preferences. And this is sort of expected, right? We know that each one of us has his very own unique and diverse preferences. And we should be actually spending a lot of time on trying to understand how we're going to respect this long tail of user preferences. And we're not doing such a good job on that front. When I did the survey, I looked at T-Mobile's Music Freedom, and 66% of the applications listed by users were not part of their program. Then we wanted to give users some more choice, so we asked them if you could choose any application to zero rate, but it would be a single one, just for you. Which one would you choose? And now the tail becomes even heavier, and we started seeing more user profiles rather than music fund that Music Freedom tries to put in place. So some people wanted to watch video, some other wanted to listen to music, others wanted to check their social networks or news or maps or email. There were different categories, and within each of these categories, you could see multiple applications of different popularity. Some of them had billions of users, and some others had just a few thousand downloads in the Google Play Store. And this long tail of user preference is not specific to zero rating, but it happens in all type of services like fast lanes. Last year, I coordinated with Google, and we ran an experiment when they were building their home on-hub router. And so we essentially enabled, we deployed it in 160 homes, and we let people decide which traffic gets priority into their home network. They could do this through a very, very simple interface that you see there in their browser, and they could just choose which websites would get priority. What we saw again was that same long tail of user preferences. And here the color coding is popularity, so the blue is the most popular and green becomes less and less popular. But there are different things within this long tail. Video applications, somebody boosted Ticketmaster to get tickets for popular events before they get sold out, and so on and so forth. So just the high level point from this part is that there is a long tail of user preferences, and we should be really trying to respect this. And I think there are two critical things we need to do in order to come up with more inclusive and services that better serve users. The first one is to have clear and transparent processes on how application can get zero rated or prioritized. If we look at the Music Freedom example, one way to do it would be for T-Mobile to maintain a public database of all the requests from streaming providers to participate in their program. And when somebody applies, there should be a guarantee that they will be included in their program within 1 week. And ideally, we should just let users decide and not dictate, not put any limitation on what this content is. And this brings me to the second part of my talk, which is how can we enable users to express these preferences? So what is the technical mechanism that we can use in order to communicate something from the user to the network? I think there are three high-level requirements to have here. The first one is that we want a mechanism that is simple for users to understand and use, yet expressive, so that we can capture this long tail of user preferences, and we can also express complex things like zero rate a website or a mobile application. We want something that can be practically deployed. So it should work in the presence of encryption, in the presence of middle boxes, and it shouldn't be requiring any major changes. It should be incrementally deployable with existing infrastructure. And we want something that respects the trust relationships between the different stakeholders. And I think in this room we have all stakeholders, so this is great. We need some good primitives around accountability, authentication, privacy, revocation mechanisms, etc. And what we found out is that all the existing mechanisms that we have, like deep packet inspection, deep serve, or an out-of-band approach, do not meet any of these requirements, or they meet some of these requirements. So what we did is to develop a new mechanism to communicate user preferences to the network called network cookies. I'm not going to go into the deep details here. I just want to give you a high-level notion of how network cookies work. So the first step is to think of network services as lanes. So we can have the best effort lane, the zero-rated lane, and the fast lane. And all we have to do is let the users decide what traffic goes to what lane. And then it's up to the network to take this user preference and turn it into the actual configuration within their network. And we've done some work on different approaches with network function virtualization or software-defined networks on how we can translate these preferences from cookies down to the network configuration. Now, what a cookie is essentially is a small piece of data that users can append to their traffic in order to consume one of these services. The basic workflow is that each user gets a cookie for each of the service they want to use, and whenever they want to send some of their traffic through that lane, they just append the cookie to their desired traffic. The network matches against the traffic and then enforces the desired service. And there are some extra bits of functionality that I'm not showing here to make sure that cookies are secured, they cannot be replayed, they have low overhead, and so on and so forth. So the high level here is that the high level point here is that cookies are a mechanism to communicate user preferences to the network. It's simple and expressive, it can be practically deployed, and it respects the tussle between different stakeholders. And it's because of these properties that using cookies we can build services which are more inclusive, better auditable by somebody like the FCC, and they can enable user-driven network services. If you're interested to learn more about this work, send me an email, and if you're interested to have a trial with cookies or user-driven networks, I will be very, very happy to talk to you.
Now I invite all the panelists to please come on stage. You just saved your neck in the past hour without having to twist it backward to look at the slides. Well, that's a lot of very different set of topics. If I think about 3x2 little table in my head, the two columns could be whether it's more on the edge or more on the interconnection. And the three rows could be, who to charge it to, including zero rating possibilities, the kind of service you're charging for, including possibly fast lane or quality of service guarantee, and then how do you charge it, including time-dependent pricing, congestion-dependent pricing, peak value, and so on. And I think the previous 5 speakers have covered pretty much every single one of the 6 cells in this 3x2 table. Now, in the interest of time, which strictly speaking we have like 7 minutes, let me just zoom into one of the 6 cells, which is my instruction from Nick, to look at the particular corner of more on the edge and more on the question of who to pay. All right, so who to pay? Well, zero rating, two-sided pricing, toll-free, however you want to call it. Somebody need to be paying for it. Now, in the area of enterprise or B2B, it's much clearer that, for example, employer might be paying for BYOD, employees, enterprise-related mobile data. Fine. So let's look at the other half of the universe, the consumer side. So who will be paying for the zero rating? It might be a particular platform provider, it might be the operator, it might be advertiser, it might be content provider, might be e-commerce provider. What do you think? Again, in interest of time, if you can just limit your answer to very, very brief one. Let's start maybe from Benjamin over here.
Yeah, I mean, so just speaking from Facebook's program and our perspective, can you hear me? Is this on? So just speaking, I mean, I have to speak for free basics. So the way it's set up, and I kind of covered this already, but it's free program. So the user isn't paying, the end user isn't paying. We're not paying the operator and the content providers. It's important that the content providers aren't having to pay us or the operator. So it's a totally open platform. So you see the operators, and the question comes up, why is the operator doing this then if we're not paying them to do it for the zero rating of the platform and the services? And what you see is that they're doing it because for them, and what happens, we've seen in all the markets where this has happened, what you see is that this brings more people online and more people start eventually paying for data. So for the operator, it's beneficial because it's growing the overall number of subscribers eventually. So I'd say that it's the operator offering the zero rating on their end to begin with.
Okay. Anyone else? Feel free to pass if you don't want to answer that.
Well, I was going to say one of the examples that was on one of my slides was basically Netflix in their original constitution. They paid for the delivery. They used a really high latency, very, very high capacity broadband network. They used the U.S. Postal Service, and nobody had a problem with that. That worked really fine. If you're in the media industries, you do that kind of stuff all the time. Book publishers, all that sort of stuff. And it's a very different model. So I think that it depends on the context, but generally, anybody could pay. I think in the context of where you're actually trying to produce internet, I feel better when the people that are doing it, and I think Facebook fits this case, can see that if there were more people on the internet, they would really benefit. So I really understand what they're doing, as opposed to someone who says, I want people to watch my content only. Now, we can later have this tussle about, how honest is Facebook? Is like basically, are they going to suck everybody into Facebook and it's their version of the internet, and keep an eye on them? And could be someone else, but that that's an issue. But they have an incentive to actually get what what Benjamin said they're trying to do.
Well, I think the answer is going to vary, and the main reason is with marginal cost declining as a fraction of the total, there are many, many more possibilities. With new businesses such as Facebook or Google having really huge profit margins, they can take a hit on a small number of users. They can kind of hope to benefit later from kind of growth and getting people addicted to it. Other people can also jump in. All sorts of options come up. Things which were not realistic when the marginal costs were very high. If it costs you 90% of what you're collecting from users just to pay your suppliers, then you're very limited in that market.
Yeah, I think one extra view here is that there is one question who is paying, and the other is who is available to participate in these types of programs, right? And this is what we've seen from these user studies, that very often, it could be a promotion by the operator, or it's part of a limited plan that the user pays, but they do not have all the options that they want to have. So I think it's also who pays, but also what is included in this program and what options you have in order to make this payment.
Well, let's talk about the options then. The difference between open and closed, toll-free, and just to clarify, potential conflict of interest here. That I'm the co-founder of a startup company called DataMe, D-A-T-A-M-I, that is now leading technology provider of open toll-free. But this is not a commercial time for DataMe. You can check it out on the website. But what is interesting is because of the association with DataMe and its many trials around the world to look at the impact of toll-free, we can clearly see if you allow everybody who want to sponsor to get on an open platform without channeling them through a particular company, and if you and allow that openness to happen, then you see a substantial uptick. Now, Yannis, between what you presented and what a lot of people in this country, or maybe in India as well, is perceiving what Facebook is trying to do, whether that is indeed what Facebook is trying to do or not, we'd love to look at this debate. Some people think that if it's just toll-free, not fast lane, these are two distinct concepts. Fast lane is under much stronger scrutiny. Pay for a higher speed on the edge. even in the US. But if it's just sponsoring data, there's sponsored content all over the places, TV, newspaper, radio. If you have more marketing budget, you sponsor more effectively, fine. But I think what a lot of people was not okay with was this perception that if, whether it's perceived as by T-Mobile or Facebook, there is a winner-loser picking by a particular company, then it starts to get people a bit more concerned as opposed to the open toll-free. So with that, open versus closed toll-free, I'd love to hear, especially from Benjamin and Yannis.
Yeah, so I think I find what Facebook does great, but I think they can improve upon it by making instead of free basics defined by Facebook, it could be free basics defined by users. So it could be just pick up 5 applications that you want from anything that is available, and then you will have these 5 applications, and if you want to use the rest, then you're turning to a paid customer. So from a user perspective, it's fairly similar, but we don't have all this concern about whether Facebook is making some of the choices. And I don't know the implementations. I know that some people complain that Facebook gets access to the decrypted data, etc. So I think this is another technical part that needs to be discussed. But I think I like the idea. I think it can be improved if it becomes more driven by users.
Yeah, so I'll weigh in, and I know you mentioned India. So I think a big part of it always is perception. So if you look at how free basics is perceived in different parts of the world, it was rolled out differently. So it was rolled out originally as internet.org rather than free basics. So that by itself raised issues of people criticizing it, saying, you're representing this as the full internet and a .org, which wasn't the internet, wasn't a .org. So when we heard that, we took that to heart, and it wasn't intentional to mislead people that way, but when you're trying a new program and experimenting with something of doing it for the first time, you're going to make changes along the way. So taking perception criticism like that and making changes. And also it wasn't an open platform the same way. So it originally launched in India, it wasn't, it was something we were trying for the first time. And it was a smaller set of services. It wasn't an open platform. So it's hard to change the perceptions of a program, even when you do make updates to the program. But just to be clear, we did make those changes, and Free Basics is a totally open platform now. There are the technical guidelines that apply equally to everyone, but Facebook isn't sitting there picking and choosing services. As long as you meet those guidelines, it goes through the system, you're approved and on the platform. So, the perception that Facebook is sitting in the middle of the program somehow subjectively favoring certain services, that's not how it's structured now.
Well, let me ask my last question, and we'll see if there's still time for a question from the audience. And I'd love to hear from the other 3 panelists, and that is video was mentioned, especially long-form video. And there's a proliferation of 15-second video these days as well. But for long-form video, is it too expensive to sponsor that kind of data, to make it toll-free based on the cost today? If you think about Amazon Kindle model, years ago, that is sponsored content in the sense that you don't pay for transportation, you pay for the content itself, but utility per bits for digital books is much higher than utility per bit for a long format video. It just takes a lot of bits. So long format video, which is whatever 65% of the mobile traffic coming up, is it too much to ask for that to be toll-free? Any one of the other 3 panelists, please.
My guess is yes. Again, if you simply look at sources of money, where it comes from. Well, first of all, the main thing is video by itself is not enough, and the content is not king. I've been arguing for a long time. You simply look at, compare the revenues of, say, the cable industry from internet access alone, or even from video, compare them to wireless. And wireless, until a few years ago, was very low bandwidth service. Wireless was getting much more because connectivity matters more to people. So people are willing to pay more for just fairly low bandwidth communication. How much are they willing to pay for video? Well, there is a certain amount, substantial amount, and it's hard to accommodate it. Even say, advertising revenues might be enough if you directed all of them to pay for video, but it's just barely, so in practice you couldn't possibly hope to do it. What you could have done, I actually argued for it about 15 years ago, is for the internet industry to make music free on the internet. Music revenues were small enough compared to telecom revenues or internet access revenues that could have worked. You would not have had a trouble with pirated music. You could have had the industry kind of pay the musicians in some sense as a way to attract more users. There, I think, again, there are political, regulatory, and all sorts of other issues that was made it totally impractical, but at least the numbers would have sort of fitted. For video, I don't think it quite works.
I don't know if Bill or Dhanaraj, if you would like to.
We have free video all over the place. That's what broadcast TV is. And so, I mean, there are all kinds of things you could do there, and that's what Netflix paid the users. You didn't pay for the envelopes to mail them back, and Netflix didn't have to open up their envelopes for other people that wanted to copy their model. And as I understand, there's a lot of intellectual property. I don't know the full details about their whole mailing program, but and that's the entertainment business. We may feel differently about what Facebook is trying to do in Africa because they're not trying to do television. They're trying to do basic internet connectivity. Very different proposition. That is,
So with video, I think in a lot of developing countries, the mobile operators recognize that it's very important as well. And in some cases where they don't necessarily zero rate those kinds of services, they often offer like special discounted plans, just so that a user can access a particular kind of TV service or movie service. And so in that sense, you see a proliferation of those kinds of plans where they're specifically looking at that and essentially price discriminating based on that kind of content.
Well, I know that we are 7 minutes past 3 o'clock. This is a huge topic, pricing in networks. We haven't even got into much of interconnection pricing or cloud pricing, mostly focusing on the mobile edge pricing, when we are already out of time. Now, Nick, should we allow questions from the audience, or let's go have tea?
I think we can maybe take like 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, maybe 1 or 2 questions, if there is any. Yes, please.
I was wondering, I think one thing that you haven't mentioned is that, what about social entrepreneurship? But you charge somebody else a little bit more, and you charge less or free for some, maybe poor people that couldn't pay otherwise. Would that be working that way? Thank you, I'm sorry.
Are you directing to this question to a particular panelist or anyone who would like to answer?
Anyone would.
Well, I mean, there's a whole principle of price discrimination, and I fully agree with Bill. That's kind of a driving force behind the economy. It happens to conflict with the Adam Smith's idea of a market in many ways, but it's something that unavoidable. And actually, it's I think a fruitful way to look at the history of telecommunications as well as of other industries as a conflict between this economic efficiency, which requires price discrimination, and some other desiderata, such as issues of fairness and such like that arise. But absolutely.
But I mean, if you think about it just as a pricing problem, it's a mixed integer pricing problem when you're talking about access. You want to set access when people have heterogeneous demand and usage habits. You want to raise the access price as high as you can, but so that so you get the right number of people. So you lower access, you balance usage, and at some point you got to make trade-offs. If you add additional instruments and segment the market better, you can avoid sort of those problems. So the more instruments you have, the more pricing you can do, the better you can fit the curve. And if there are people that are covering their incremental cost, you want them on the network. So you don't want them to contribute to the shared cost. You want, Ramsey pricing is a way to figure out how to get who's going to pay for the shared cost. But of course, if I'm someone that can avoid paying the cost, it doesn't matter if I'm rich or not, I'm going to try and do that. I'm going to, do my outside option that's cheaper.
Any other burning questions? If not, I would like to thank all the 5 panelists and thank again all of you for coming to a wonderful day on an important topic organized by Princeton Center for Information Technology Policy. Thank you.